Love came and became like blood in my body. It rushed through my veins and encircled my heart. Everywhere I looked, I saw one thing, the beloved's name written on my limbs, on my left palm, on my forehead, on the back of my neck, on my right big toe. Oh, my friend, all that you see of me is just a shell. The rest belongs to the beloved. This is Rumi. One more. I swallowed some of the beloved's sweet wine, and now I am ill. My body aches. My fever is high. They called in the doctor, and he said, drink this tea. Okay, time to drink this tea. Take these pills. Okay, time to take these pills. The doctor said, get rid of the sweet wine of the beloved's lips. Okay, time to get rid of the doctor. So a new man moved into the retirement community, and some woman came up to him and said, you look just like my third husband. He said, well, that's curious, that's interesting. How many times have you been married? She said, twice. Once upon a time, there was a man and a very poor woman. They lived right close to a wall. On the other side of that wall was a beautiful garden, but it belonged to an enchantress, and she was evil, and she was dangerous, so they stayed away from her. They had hoped to have a child, and finally it seemed that God had blessed them, and the woman was pregnant. And in her pregnancy, she started to long for a certain kind of green lettuce or parsley that is called Rapunzel. And it was growing over that wall in the enchantress's garden. And she wanted it so desperately. And she said, husband, I think I'll die if I don't have some of that to eat. Well, he was an honest man, and he was terrified of that enchantress. But in the middle of the night, he climbed over that wall and got some for his wife. And she ate it in the middle of the night and wanted 3 times as much as she had before. So the next night, he climbed over the wall again to get some more. He didn't want to do it. He was an honest man, but his wife, he loved his wife. She really did seem quite desperate. He believed her when she said she might die if she didn't have it. It sounds like an addiction to me, but we'll stay with the story for a moment here. So he climbs over the wall, and he's about to reach for more of that Rapunzel when he hears a voice. How dare you steal from my garden? You will pay with your life. Oh, please, no, it was for my wife. I was so scared that she might die. I had to do this. She's pregnant, you know, and I don't understand. She seems to want to eat certain things. Have you ever been around a person who is pregnant, and all of a sudden you need to eat a certain thing? I mean, you really, really need to eat a certain thing. And if you're of the male persuasion, you are in the car down to the market, finding at whatever hour. It must happen. It is a force of nature. A child, you say, you know witches and enchantresses and the like are not able to be pregnant for some reason in the lore. And she says, I had always wanted a child. You can have all you want, and you can have your life if I can have the child. Yes, anything. He agrees. He's terrified, and he's terrified for his wife, and he agrees to everything. And that's a flaw in the story, and that's a flaw in character. And that's not just a bad father story. It's the mistakes we have made, the deals we have made. At any rate, the pregnancy goes well. She is eating these big salads of this wonderful lettuce, or maybe it's parsley. Anyway, she is successful in childbirth, and the enchantress shows up and takes the child. And that is the last we hear of the parents. Sometimes the story is told without even including that preface. I think it's important to have the old trauma, the early history when we try to understand characters later in a story. The enchantress raises the girl, who is strong and healthy and quite beautiful, and has unbelievably beautiful hair, which grows quite long. In the Grimm brothers, it's golden, but it's told in different colors depending on the ethnic group that's retelling the story. And this story has traveled all over the world and is one of a whole series of stories of the woman in the tower. And there are some martyr stories in the Catholic tradition. St. Barbara, who you may have heard of. There's a city somewhere named after her. Anyway, she is one of the stories of the woman in the tower. These are stories that are probably about protecting someone or controlling someone, trying to keep them away from exposure to the world, whether it's falling in love or getting pregnant, or some religion that the parents don't agree with is out there, and so they try to contain. It never works, never works. The young woman in the tower always gets out, always finds the world eventually. You may have had daughters. The world is out there. It's on a motorcycle with a leather jacket. The world will find whatever tower you build, it will not hold. So when she is 12, the witch, the enchantress, the sorceress, moves her out into the forest, the deep forest, where a tower has been built. And we don't get the details of how it was built. In some stories, they say it was built around her. You see, there is no door to the tower. There is one window. It's quite high. I went to Ireland years ago several times, and there are these towers that were built to avoid the danger of Viking raids. And there is no door. There's a window way up there. And there will be a farm, which is like a little village. And if the word comes that the Vikings are on their way, they had a notched pole, which is a kind of ladder that they would tip up. And they would all scramble up into the tower, and then they would pull the pole in. And it worked. They would pillage the whole farm and take all the goods, but people wouldn't be murdered and that kind of thing. This tower was a defense. So this is our defense against the inevitabilities of life, that kind of thing. And the girl is happy from all we know in the story. She lives with the old woman who is the only mother she's ever known, and they're very tight, and they get along, and the girl sings all day long. Now this is a curious part of the story, that she's quite happy, that this is a good life and a good connection. And this is the mother-daughter bond. Even though it's not the actual birth mother, there is that closeness that can happen. A child of the same gender that sometimes is a beautiful romance in its own right. Sometimes the most beautiful romance in a lifetime is that one. But that one has a due date on it. That one will end. Just because something ends doesn't mean it wasn't beautiful for its time. So one day, the woman comes and goes. She has to go get groceries and things. So she you know the story, she lets herself down by this hair. Now you think, ouch, 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 aha. There is a detail in the story. There was a hook at the top of the window when the tower was constructed. A big hearty hook was put in at the top of the window frame. So actually the hair is tied around that and then is so long that there's plenty to tie and reach the ground. And that is how the old woman comes and goes. And when she comes back with her bags of groceries from, Trader Joe's, she calls up, Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair. And the girl tosses down the hair. It's often depicted as braided, and the woman can climb up easily. That is the entry point. And it's about the hair, the glorious femininity of this long, beautiful, strong hair. And it is said that girl is so beautiful that she's, except for the sun god, the most radiant thing in all creation. And notice how exaggerated how elaborate that praise is. Dangerously beautiful, if you ask me. To crowd the gods, that was the big risk in the Greek imagination. The thing that would bring down the house was to assume something that should belong to the gods. And some young people are powerfully, dangerously beautiful, and the whole family is kind of scared about it. And she often doesn't have a clue, but so it goes. One day, you'll remember the story. A young man was out in the woods, a prince on his horse. Why was he there? It doesn't say. He was probably hunting. People didn't venture into the woods back in those times. I know it's all metaphorical, but there were actual woods. There were dangerous places. There were creatures. There was no rescue service. No paramedic could come in and help you if you got into trouble. Your cell phone reception was terrible in those days. It wouldn't happen. So people stayed away, except for herbalists, magicians, midwives, people that had religious problems in town, people that didn't fit in, who were then sometimes called witches. There's a lot of lore about that, but we do have a story about an enchantress off in the forest, but this one has a young woman in it. So the young man comes along, as they do, as they tend to come along sooner or later, and he hears the singing. Remember, the girl is singing all day, and it's quite beautiful. And he is in love with her before he even sees her. And she doesn't even know creatures like him exist. He finally follows the singing and makes his way to the tower and wonders why anyone has built a tower so far off into the forest. There's nothing that goes on here. And one day, listening to the singing, standing by a tree, he notices an old woman come to the tower and look up at the window and say, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." And then this beautiful hair cascades out of the window, and the woman climbs up that. And the man takes note. He thinks, that's very interesting. Perhaps I will use the old woman's trick and go and see who is doing this beautiful singing. Well, actually, some days pass. Now, the girl was 12 when they moved into the forest, but some years have passed now. She is courtship age by now in the tale. And the young man takes his time, but finally one day when the old woman has left in the morning for whatever she seems to, he's sort of casing the joint here, he notices that she's gone most of the day, comes back in the evening. We might even say that she is a creature of the night and it disappears in the day. It's a lunar story probably. And he comes and says, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." She doesn't notice that the voice is a little deeper. She wraps it around the hook and throws it out, and this time through the window comes this very different person, much more attractive than her mother, the old woman. In fact, she's quite struck with how beautiful he is, and he is taken with her attractiveness too. This is youth. Anyway, she's also noticing that he's very easy to draw up with her hair, a little detail that's important in the story. But they fall in love immediately. That's the way courtship is never difficult. Yours, mine, that difficult. I remember telling some, years ago, that somebody I was dating said I was immature, that I wasn't adult enough for her. So I told her to get out of my fort. Like that one, I don't know. No accounting for joke taste. Now, the craving that led to the pregnancy, that's whatever. It doesn't have to be food. It doesn't have to be a drug. It can be a craving for a certain kind of experience. It is overwhelming. It is what sets the story off on its trajectory. The small window that opens, there's a division in the beginning of the story. That wall, we're divided into two. And you have poverty and wealth, and you have good and evil. You have all the pairs of opposites. You have dichotomous thinking, black and white thinking. That is a problem that we hope the story will address, that should be solved by the end of the story if things go well. There is a trickster role in this story. The father is a thief. He steals from the wealthy neighbor. The young man is a thief. He intends to steal this girl away from her family, which is just the one woman at the time. So, what will happen? We have the symbol of the tower. There are a lot of metaphors, the tower of strength, the ivory tower, places where we hide away for one reason or another. The romance goes well for a while. He shows up every day, waits for the old woman to leave, follows her lead, calls out, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair," and spends time with his beloved. Marriage is implied. And she accepts, particularly because he's so attractive, which is strange. We tend to think in these stories it's the beautiful princess, and she is. But in this, she is very impressed with his looks, which reminds us of youthful attraction, youthful appeal, and the kind of values that go into choices made early in life. And sometimes we recover from them, and sometimes we don't. You can't buy love, but you can pay dearly for it. But I digress. So what's going to happen? How are they going to live happily ever after? She comes up with an idea. Bring a spool of silk each time you come. It's not one isn't very much. It isn't hard to carry, and I can still lift you up. But when I have a number of them, I can weave a ladder out of that, and then we will make our escape. The symbolism is rich. It's a silken ladder. They intend this to be a smooth event where they get away with it. They get away. They slip away. They don't ask. They don't negotiate. He doesn't ask for her hand or any of that. He's going to steal her. It's transgressive. She is not her own property in a way. Someone has devoted themselves to her, and yet she will go without thinking much, without a thought about it. One day, when she's drawing up her mother, who by now in the story has a name, Dame Gothel, which I looked up. It means dark sun. It's probably a lunar reference. She says, it's strange. It takes so much effort to draw you up. I mean, the young man is with me in a moment. Slip of the tongue? The one thing she must not say, she says. Or is it too hard for her to keep a secret, like a young person who's just bursting with a secret and it has to come out? Or is it necessary in the story? Yes, it's necessary in the story. In fact, most of our mistakes are. And perhaps our mistakes are made unconsciously so that we can get into the trouble we need to get into. At any rate, the dark part of the story is pretty dark, because this woman is not easygoing. And she is furious. You have betrayed me. I have given everything to you. And she has. She has devoted her entire life to that girl, who is now planning to just leave without a word. And so she punishes her. You will suffer for this. And she cuts off her hair and takes her out of the tower into a wasteland, not the rich forest where you could eke out a living. No, out into the marshes or the moors or the desert, someplace where it's very hard to survive. And leaves her there, and they never see each other again. The girl discovers she is pregnant. Now we know what was going on in the tower during all those visits. At any rate, no marriage ceremony, it is implied in the story. She is out there and gives birth to twins, a boy and a girl. So out of one come two. Out of two come birth. The young man, yes, the old woman waits for him. And he comes to the tower and calls up, Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair. And the old woman ties the end of the braids to that hook securely and throws them out. And he pulls himself up and is quite surprised when it is not his darling. It is this furious enchantress who, I'm sure her hair stands on end. I'm adding that detail, but there's lots of meanings of hair. That's why that story was so wonderful. The moment hair is cut is often a dramatic turning point in life. That's often a life stage event. When hair is grown out, a young girl might decide to grow her hair out and then come home someday with it all punked out, shaved off, as a kind of something to her parents, a statement, and it is, and it works. And mom's heart is, oh, the beautiful hair. Yeah, this is me. I'm going to wear a shaved head for a while. You're lucky it wasn't a tattoo. And then sooner or later it's going to be a tattoo. Anyway, but that's, I remember being drawn into our nation's service, and in Army boot camp, they shave off your hair, which, it was the 60s. I had long, glorious hair. It wasn't long enough to climb up a tower with, but it was a statement, and my parents kept saying, why don't you get a haircut? I could afford a haircut. I didn't want one, but the Army decided what I wanted, and that was life for a while. And it is a moment. It is a moment of transition where you lose your identity. You are you look in your mirror, you look like a different person. Now the young man is in trouble. You are going to take my beautiful daughter from me. Well, you will never see her again. I am going to carve your eyes out. As she comes out at him with a knife or a pick, and he backs away, falls out of the window. You think he made his escape? No. There are some brambles down there with big thorns, and they tear his eyes out. Sometimes a thing that's going to happen in life or in a story is going to happen. And so now he is blind, wandering around in a forest. And this part of the story is quite lengthy, although I won't take a long time telling it. She is raising two little ones on nothing out in the wild. He is wandering around the forest, bumping into things. Amazing that a wild animal didn't get him. Amazing that he could find berries once in a while to eat or a creek to drink from, because he is blind. It is quite an accomplishment that they survive. And some time goes by, and one day he hears on the wind, clearly from far away, singing. And he thinks she's alive. and then the wind shifts and he can't, and he's blind. So it takes him the longest time of stumbling around and hurting himself and falling off over brams and bushes and things. And then one day he hears it a little stronger, and then he follows it and he finds her. And she sees him. He does not see her, he is blind. He is not the beautiful young man who climbed up her hair years ago. He is banged up and a mess. I mean, he's still a prince, but he's not real charming right now. And she takes him in her arms and weeps for him, is glad to see he is alive, but weeps for how he has suffered. Like she hasn't. She has had a horrible, challenging time, but she's in love here. She's thinking of the other, and the tears fall into his face, and the tears fall into his eyes, and his sight is restored. It's a fairy tale. It's not about actual blindness, it's about symbolic blindness. It's about somebody who can't see the good things for a while. And then through the gentleness and the compassion of someone else begins to see beauty again. Their eyesight is, their vision is restored. And they struggle to find their way out of the wasteland and find their way out of the forest, but he does take her back to his kingdom, and they grow somewhat stronger along the way. They're eating a little better because he's a hunter, and they get back, and as it turns out, his father, the king, had died in this long absence, and the people are so happy that the king is alive and has brought a queen, and they are restored to the castle, and they get some nice clothes. I wore the fancy robe for the stole here for the occasion. Thank you, Kristen. And they live happily ever after. That is the story, it's a familiar story. It's a harder story than the version that is usually told to the children. That section in the wasteland is when couples discover there are problems. And sometimes the first reaction is, there shouldn't be problems. That's not the problem. The problem is not having problems. The problem is thinking you shouldn't have problems. And then there's blame. Blaming others, blaming oneself, blaming one's lot in life. And then eventually we get over the blaming part, start working on the problems, and start realizing, yeah, that's regular life. That is how things work, and then you get good at it. And of course, this story is about young love, and it's boy-girl love. We could have girl-girl love, or any variation going on, or we could have older love. And I've got a little story to that. But older love is when you don't just say, I love you. You say, remember to take your medicine. This is from Sun magazine, which I absolutely adore, written by one of the readers. My parents were married for 51 years. 10 years after my father died, my mother met Leo at her senior center. She was 85. He was 90. My mother had always been painfully shy and had spent much of her life living in the shadow of my outgoing father. Leo, who had lost his wife a year earlier, was talkative and forward, and my mother found him charming. They were both involved with the same progressive causes and loved to talk politics. She once told me that whenever she attempted to discuss world events with my father, he would fall asleep. A few months after they met, Leo told my mother that if she wanted to move in with him, he had a guest bedroom for her. Her immediate response, if I live with you, I'll be sleeping in your bed. She soon moved into Leo's condo, returning to her own home once a week to check the mail and the garden. When the family gathered that Thanksgiving, Leo and my mother cuddled on the couch like two love-crazed adolescents. At first, we, her children, were embarrassed, but we soon found the new couple's happiness rather charming. Back home, they would stroll along the boardwalk by the ocean, holding hands, radiant as young lovers. People passing by would pause and smile at them, astonished. 4.5 years into the relationship, Leo had a stroke. His speech became slow and slurred, but his smile remained bright. My mother bravely became his caregiver. They continued their walks along the ocean, my mother now pushing Leo's wheelchair. During the last few months of his life, hospice workers moved in with him. My mother warred with them constantly, objecting to their mechanical routines, their lack of compassion, and what she thought was an overuse of morphine. When Leo died at 95, she wrote a poem for the memorial service called An Ode to a Beloved Companion. My mother is now 103 years old, still healthy and cognitively sharp. She insists on living alone, cooking her own vegetarian meals, washing her own clothes. Every year on the anniversary of Leo's death, his daughter and her husband drive my mother to the cemetery, and in the Jewish tradition, the three of them place a small stone on Leo's grave. It makes me happy to think that my mother found the love of her life at 85, even if their affair lasted only 5 years. My only regret is that the man of her dreams was not my father. I want to close with something from William Butler Yeats. It's called The Song of Wandering Aengus. It's well known, you probably know it. It's about mystical love. I mean, there's a girl in the poem, but she's an angel or something, we don't know, but it's something beyond human. I went out to the hazel wood because a fire was in my head, and cut and peeled a hazel wand, and hooked a berry to a thread. And when white moths were on the wing and moth-like stars were flickering out, I dropped the berry in a stream and caught a little silver trout. When I had laid it on the floor, I went to blow the fire aflame, but something rustled on the floor, and someone called me by my name. It had become a glimmering girl with apple blossom in her hair, who called me by my name and ran and faded through the brightening air. Though I am old from wandering through hollow lands and hilly lands, I will find out where she has gone, and kiss her lips, and take her hands, and walk among long dappled grass, and pluck till time and times are done the silver apples of the moon, the golden apples of the sun. Namaste. So be it.